Greetings, citizens! I am Failure to Report, and the day we all look forward to every 3 months is finally here. That's right, boys and girls, Star Citizen 3.5 has been granted clearance for takeoff into the live servers. That means no more, but it's PTU! It's time to put it on the scales and see where she falls. So, with that said, here's a look at Week 1, Star Citizen 3.5. Now, first and foremost, before we do get into all of this, I want to thank the people who braved the spectrum of Spectrum, as well as the Star Citizen subreddit, to provide critical feedback. I know it's daunting to go into those arenas and say, I don't like X about Star Citizen, because there will inevitably be people who will insist that you're stupid, wrong, should quit if you don't like it, and so forth. The point being, to all of you who stood up and spoke out on heat, especially in regards to normal flight, I sincerely salute you. It's easy to feel shouted down on those platforms, but the only way the critical voice gets offered to the developers is if people like you keep putting it forward. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for that. Now, with that out of the way, here we go. Star Citizen 3.5 introduces a couple major new features, some of which were slotted to have been in 3.4 originally, but were delayed due to the holiday time constraints. I'm fine with this, I'm not complaining about that, and I made a point to say so in the 3.4 video. So take your sausage fingers off of the keyboard before you start crying that I'm impatient. I'm pointing out a fact, and it's okay. So, chief among the features that were pushed from the 3.4 build is the new flight model. Arccorp, its moons Lyria and Walla, and to the Citizen ERP community's excitement, female waifu pilot models. We also saw some of the core plan features of 3.5 introduced, such as DNA face customization, a really kind of Grand Theft Auto reminiscent wanted system complete with spawn on you space police, the remainder of the MISC Reliant variants, which is anytime a new ship line is fully fleshed out, this makes me happy. It's a welcomed addition. We also saw a new talking mission giver located in Area 18, the aim assist gimbaled weapons, as well as extra color options for player armors and a lot of different bug fixes, tunings, and such and such and such. Now, sadly, this fountain of content that was mostly scheduled for 3.4 did come at a cost. We lost Salvaging's first iteration, which has now been pushed once again to 3.8. The Origin 300 series rework has only been partially completed, with only the 300i being in-game currently, and the remaining 3 variants are still sitting at 6 out of 10 tasks completed as of this video. As well as the poor Banu Defender, which got totally bumped from 3.5 to 3.6. But hey, at least they had time to mash out an Ursa Rover Fortuna and the Super Hornet Heartseeker to cash in on St. Paddy's Day and Valentine's Day, right? Because you can choose both of those in 3.5 right now. You know, if you're interested. Anyhow, let's talk about some of the things that are in 3.5. Starting with the elephant in the room, the flight model. If you haven't logged into Star Citizen at all during the 3.5 PTU and live servers, the first thing you're going to notice after powering up your ship is that all the things are different. Controls are totally revamped. Pro tip, don't press T or U to perform any kind of targeting anymore. Actually, do press one of those. Then come thank me for giving you a heads up so you could do it while you were on the pad at Olisar and not the first time you get into a furball with a player, like I did. A large majority of key bindings have been completely reassigned, and many of them are now tied to completely different systems. This is because the flight model added a ton of new controls, and CIG has kind of always struggled with defaulting a sensible keyboard layout. Additionally, the way ships are flown is completely different. You no longer have a throttle percentage. In 3.5, you set a speed limiter and you strafe thrust forwards and backwards within that limit. To accelerate out of what used to be considered sub-cruise mode speeds, you need to move your new speed limiter up to the desired cruise speed and either maintain forward thrust by holding down the key or using your joysticks. I don't know how you do that stuff. I don't know. I'm not a stick warrior. Or you set the new cruise control and the ship will do its best to meet the desired speed. A word of caution on the new cruise control though, your ship will do its best to meet your desired speed, even if that means cooking its own thrusters out. So be careful setting that in any kind of delicate situations where you might need to actually have control of your ship. Oh, right. Speaking of which, have we talked about heat yet? Let's talk about heat. There's a fun new mechanic. Previous to 3.5, heat was only present in the quantum drive and with some weapons. Even then in 3.4, your quantum drive never really overheated much, and the majority of people only saw quantum drive heat as a cooldown while waiting to jump to your next waypoint. In 3.5, heat is all encompassing. From your quantum drive, to your weapons, to your thrusters, to your main drive engine, you name it, it probably has heat tied into it. This is a huge new presence in every aspect of ship piloting now, especially in that CIG has removed the ability to overclock coolers, which means no more being a cheeky little shit and overclocking the coolers just to overclock everything else also. Now, in the initial builds of 3.5 PTU, heat was incredibly punishing and honestly made just flying a planet's surface absolutely miserable. You would frequently cook your thrusters even while flying without afterburner at or below the intended sub-cruise mode speeds. If you did anything but flew in a straight line, you would start getting heat prompts and your engines would fry out. Don't worry, they reboot after a short cooldown, but still, it's incredibly aggravating. Thankfully, in the PTU 3.5 T patch, heat was revamped to be less idiotic to the point where heat is now very much present when flying past your ship's intended ranges. But if you stay within SCM speeds and don't glue your shift key down, you should be able to perform basic intended functions for your ship class, from hauling in a cargo ship to light dogfighting, as long as you're not really pushing your ship to its limits. Now, unfortunately, balancing heat and the other new aspects of this flight model is likely going to be deja vu for anyone who's been around while CIG pongs back and forth tuning this thing out. Some of the major noticeable issues are that the new flight model is very drifty, which means getting into a proper fight requires both parties to kind of want it. I'm sure there are some PvP haters who are just creaming their pants right now because this really doesn't affect combat against NPCs, but with how often players seem to keep their limiters above SEM speed and how much you drift trying to stay on them, as well as countering their own drift, sprinkled in with a good pinch of melting your own thrusters from trying to counterburn to keep the fight going, combat against other players is kind of a mess now. I would solidly wager that most players who are jumping into 3.5 in this current form are going to see no shortage of jousting back and forth in Star Citizen, which, while I don't hate jousting any more or less than I hate circle strafing, it's a big issue when CIG keeps saying they are tuning this flight model to be more about close engagements and calling down weapon ranges to reflect it. So, Cliff notes, the flight model feels very similar to the old one, but it handles very differently, due in part to drifting velocities, heat being a constraint, and the many new inputs for basic flight. I'm not coming out against this flight model. It can be really fun, especially when fighting another player who wants to fight also and doesn't fly like someone stuck the limiter to max and just keeps mashing forwards. But as it sits right now, I think a lot of people who have been waiting for 3.5 to go live are going to probably be pretty annoyed. On the subject of combat, let's touch on another major feature and some of the associated things that were introduced with Star Citizen 3.5. Assisted Gimbals. Remember when I said Star Citizen was borrowing more and more from Elite Dangerous and people laughed at me and talked some mad smack? God, it's good to be right. After a massive effort to contain my ego, I managed not to post a "I told you so" when CIG dropped Gimbals on backers, but for the record, I did tell you so. With 3.5, we see the introduction of assisted gimbals as a setting in your weapon configurations. What this actually means is that any weapon that is on a gimbal mount can toggle between three modes of use. Fixed, which remains much the same as before. Gimbal, which allows users to aim with their mouse, just as previous. And the new baby to the arena, assisted gimbals. This is basically auto-aiming. So if you've ever used Elite Dangerous's gimbals, this is going to feel pretty familiar. With assisted gimbals, players are given a cone on their main HUD in which any target within that cone will automatically be aimed at by the gimbal-mounted weapons. The closer you fly with your reticle on the targeting pip, the better the gimbals will do at hitting the target. Now, I've seen a lot of PvP-centric players flipping tables over assisted gimbals, but I honestly feel that not only is this system fine, it's kind of needed in Star Citizen. Look, a lot of backers have trouble in a dogfight with not flying themselves into getting killed. Then start factoring in the amount of backers who struggle to even land a shot on another player, And it gets really easy for me to justify CIG adding something like this, especially when you consider just how many Star Citizens back this game under Chris's horse crap about being a PvP slider, so you won't be forced into it. I think letting these guys have some handicap is absolutely fine, especially if CIG keeps tuning it out. Then potentially assisted Gimbals could fit into Star Citizen just as well as Gimbals do in Elite Dangerous. It's also really important to consider that assisted gimbals still require a pilot to stay on a target pip to land shots reliably, and players who are mouse gimbaled and at a high skill ceiling are still going to be able to more accurately take out components and make cockpit shots than somebody railing away with an assisted gimbal. Fixed weapon pilots are also still getting a size advantage over both, so I feel like it's a system of trade-offs that just needs to be properly tuned. As it is with Elite Dangerous, gimbals just need to be properly balanced, and honestly, if CIG can't manage that, assisted gimbals should be the least concern of backers. Now, I'm also not going to make a huge fuss about the new weapons controls because one of the things they added in 3.5 is weapon convergence, which means I can finally pummel the life out of targets with all of my weapons in the Vanguard. Prior to this feature, you needed to keep an eye on mixed weapon loadouts for their velocities as well as their hardpoint positioning, or else you weren't able to fully utilize all of the weapons at once on a target without getting ridiculously close to the point that spread didn't matter. With this new Convergence Edition, it means that weapons will try to shoot at the exact same pip. It's not always perfect, but again, I feel like this is a system that CIG just needs to tune out so that we don't see random convergence glitches where one of your right side cannons shoots far off to the left and high, and then all your other weapons are shooting accurately at the converged pip. So, again, I like the idea. Let's see where it is in a couple weeks. Alrighty then, that's a pretty basic rundown on the flight model and weapon changes. Moving on, we have Arccorp. This is going to be a bit of a mixed bag, and I'm going to start a war on two fronts with this section. But I feel like I do my best to stay as honest as I can with my opinions. When CIG does something good, I'm fine acknowledging it. When they do something stupid, I have no issue calling them out as well. So, if you're tempted to be mad that I'm going to criticize them, grow up. Not everything is a stroke of God's brush. If you're tempted to be mad that I'm going to applaud them, grow up. Not everything is scooped out of Chris's toilet and thrown into the game engine. So, with that said, hear me out. Arccorp is a unique new addition to Star Citizen's universe in that it's an entire planet which is covered in industrial and city buildings. There's no forest, there's no plains, there's no frozen wasteland. It is covered head to toe with cityscapes. This was a huge hurdle for Star Citizen to get past after a year of absolute terrible frame rate prior to patch 3.3. And then with the introduction of Lorville on the planet Hurston, which in comparison of city sizes is like taking a no-name town in the middle of backwater Kentucky and comparing it to every overpopulated city in China mashed together. To say the least, a lot of people were very concerned about CIG managing to get frame rates better than a PowerPoint slide out of Arccorp. This fear was kind of only made worse when 3.5 initially went to PTU and frame rates were in the single digit again. It was totally unplayable. Sadly, I didn't bother much with Arccorp in this stage after initially seeing how unplayable it was, but after sacrificing countless tributes to the engine god, CIG has managed to get a mostly smooth frame rate out of Arccorp in later builds. Fast forwarding to today's live build, and I rarely see my FPS drop below 25, which, on a planet consisting of one giant city, I'll take that in a bag of chips after surviving Levski and Lorville. Now, Arccorp can absolutely look stunning. Flying over the city planet at night is incredibly pleasing visually, and it makes me cry myself to sleep that VR is still years out or probably completely scrapped for this game. But this kind of performance isn't magic. Arccorp can have some serious pop-in, especially with the levels of detail model switching. There are many repeating proc-gen tiles in close proximity, and the traffic zooming around on this planet looks like floating blobs the majority of the time, which is honestly probably a good thing, because this whole planet is covered in a giant no-fly zone. You remember that red umbrella of death from Lorville, right? Well, here's a whole planet of that crap. And remember all the Spectrum warriors who kept telling people to shut up and accept the no-fly zone because it's realistic, you wouldn't let planes just fly around buildings, doy. And yet, all the traffic flying under tunnels, through buildings in Arccorp, they're all low poly blobs until you get close enough to see that they are all made up of cutlasses, Gladius, M50s, and Avengers. Dang. I guess in the year 29,000, flying spaceships that taxi us around the planet are kind of treated more like cars after all. Thanks for having my back, CIG. My only dig at Arccorp using smoke and mirrors with level of detail popping and bland proc-gen tiles is that the defensive community constantly goes on and on about the fidelity, no loading screens, everything is done in such fantastic detail. Bring up when CIG started using elevators to teleport players into hangars and not a peep. Point out that they bury city structures under no-fly zones so players aren't likely to trigger the high detail model, and the best they do is, oh, 'cause realism, you can't go that low in real life. Look, smoke and mirrors is fine. It's done in the industry for a reason. I don't need to see every single detail on another player's eyeball because I'm never going to see it that close. Using a lower level detail model when I'm looking at them is totally acceptable because there's no gameplay reason for me to be trying to stick my head inside of theirs. But with planets and cities, however, there are, and it bothers me that CIG prevents me from banging through the tunnels and the city canyons of places like Arccorp or Lorville because they don't want their game to look bad when someone points out the frame rate tanks for some players. I digress. Arccorp also sees a really positive difference over our last city location of Lorville in the form of the transportation from the spaceport to the city hub. It's essentially a flying tram, but what makes it so much nicer than the Lorville subway train isn't just the amazing views in transit, but that the Arccorp taxi feels much faster. And I've never seen the two running at the same schedule, which has been a constant issue for me I've always encountered on Lorville. Arccorp also feels much more alive with the level of atmosphere. Not the AI walking around like blind people tossed into an unfamiliar gymnasium, but the general atmosphere feels more alive, and thankfully, CIG didn't try to pack 15 security guards into one area so they all eventually gaggle up together and tank any poor sucker's frame rate who happens to walk up on the sweaty meat pile. Maybe that's why Arccorp runs better. Additionally, while I'm not a fan of going, oh geez, look, new mission giver, and Star Citizen, as they're usually pretty underwhelming, Arccorp introduces the latest errand giver in the form of Twitch Pachico, who by herself is pretty blah, like a very unmemorable character, don't care about her, but her issued mission is honestly really cool. After doing a quick bounty hunter mission for Crusader, I'm suddenly offered a chance to go work for this underground contact. I know, it doesn't make sense, just throw it on the pile. Anyways, this underground contact who wants me to jump in a loner cutlass and scoot over to the moon of Lyria to raid a drug lab for a special package of the good stuff. I love this mission for a few reasons, so I kind of want to touch on it. Now, first and foremost, this mission lets players who might only have a basic starter package have a chance to jump behind the stick of a Cutlass Black, which, in my opinion, if you're going to spend over $100 on Star Citizen, is one of the best choices for a lower cost ship in the game. And with how slow of a grind it is to start getting out of the starter ships in the PU, I count that as a good thing. It's also different, and I hope we see more missions that have handlers loaning out a ship for a specific task. Next up, supposedly you can steal as many drugs as you can carry out of this drug lab and sell them for yourself. Pachico only wants the maze. I have no idea how this works since you are supposed to drop the borrowed cutlass off with the maze that you steal out of lab, but I guess if you brought a bigger ship to the pickup site where you get the cutlass, you could offload it all into your real ship before turning in the maze? No clue, but the fact that it's an option is a really good thing, and it might give low starting credit players a chance to get a little bit of a bump. And while the mission only needs to be ground FPS combat, it also has the potential to be a combined arms, as other players are also out there picking up this same mission and running into you, which could lead to either dogfights over the facility or small arms fights inside of the lab. It's also the perfect kind of mission to bring a few friends and really mark your territory around the lab while you empty every single bundle of drugs out of that place. More than anything though, I feel like it's the sense of anxiety and terror of going down an elevator shaft into a drug lab with no idea what's going to happen. You have some clueless AI in there to deal with, sure, but you have no way of knowing if there's a player hiding down there, or if you're going to find the objective package and then run into somebody on the way out. It's one of the very few things in Star Citizen that actually managed to put me on the edge of my seat. I really hope we see more engaging mission contracts like this one coming out of CIG in the future. And by that, I mean hopefully not years in the future. let's see, what's next on our 3.5 list of additions? Oh, right. Female characters. There are now dozens of dudes pretending to be girls. All right, next item. Ooh, the crime system. All right. This is kind of a short one because it's basic as hell right now and honestly kind of cheesy. It feels similar to Grand Theft Auto or Ghost Recon Wildlands when you piss off the Unidad faction. Crusader security comes after you, and if you blow them up, it just gets worse. While the intent is kind of cool, I guess, it doesn't do much for Star Citizen's crime problems. Pad ramming is absolutely still meta as hell in Star Citizen. There's no deterrent that stops me from pulling a hammerhead and clearing absolutely everybody off of the pads. Especially since ships now need to power up, which means their shields are totally down for a bit even after the owner powers them on. Port Olisar is basically cancer, and you should leave that place as soon as you're able. Alrighty, so I've tried really hard not to do really long videos anymore because everybody used to complain, so I'm going to try and wrap this one up with a few cliff notes on how I feel about 3.5 and Star Citizen in general. So, first and foremost, the new flight model is a very, very different experience, and like sex, everybody's taste can be different. I'm shocked to find myself saying that I think CIG does potentially have a fun flight model foundation here, and if they manage to tune it out before Chris throws it out the window in patch 4.0, this could be a really solid spaceship blasty shooty game. Light fighters feel light and snappy, mid-range ships like the Freelancer and Connie's feel like they have some weight on them, but still stand a chance at not getting clubbed by literally everyone, and ships like the Caterpillar and the Starfarer feel appropriately encumbered. The problem with this flight model right now, in my opinion, is finding the balance between heat, drift, and engagement ranges, with maybe just a small dash of people having to relearn how to fly and finding new controls that work for their specific muscle memory. Arccorp, by itself, isn't really anything amazing. There isn't much to do there except fly around and take screenshots, which I'm sure the Star Citizen subreddit is literally rejoicing over because this planet is going to give them months of backdrop. So, what is worth praising though is that despite its barren gameplay value, CIG did manage to get an entire planet of cityscape functioning in double-digit frames. Assisted gimbals. Some people are going to go rage over these, but they aren't that bad in my opinion. And like the flight model, I think this will fit Star Citizen just fine. It's just going to be a matter of time and tuning them until CIG does find their place in the balance of things. Right now, as it stands in the live servers, patch 3.5's biggest issues are the same ones we always have. Servers throwing out 30k errors out of nowhere, potentially costing players literally everything they own, elevators and ladders murdering people as they see fit, floors deciding they want to toggle no clip mode. You know, the usual crap, right? I can absolutely see 3.5 after a few weeks being up there in playability and fun levels with the Jesus patch 3.3. But with that said, I still wouldn't call this a game. While we got some major overhauls and some new gameplay space, Star Citizen is still desperately lacking in terms of actual content. Cargo hauling is still bland and very poorly implemented. The economies are smoke and mirror and not real. Mining is even worse off after Elite Dangerous's mining overhaul. Exploration in Star Citizen currently equates to sightseeing, and fresh new gameplay loops like refueling, salvaging, and so on are constantly being pushed back patch after patch. Cloud Imperium and Chris desperately need to stop reworking the same game systems over and over and focus on getting a more complete picture into production and testing. It is entirely possible that a coming gameplay loop can completely invalidate work CIG would have then wasted months on another feature they've reworked multiple times. Refueling could finally make it into game, only for the development team to realize it completely clashes with the fuel system redesigns, or quantum travel times and capacities, or so on. These are kind of poor off-the-cuff examples, but the point is very valid and has happened countless times in other games' developments. If Star Citizen is indeed an alpha, let's focus on getting it to beta, which is feature complete, and then we can start tuning and modernizing the groundwork systems instead of revamping the Hornet for version 8.0, flight model number 6, or poop in the bowl physics 4.0. I gladly welcome the day when I can stop poking at Star Citizen, and despite what a lot of fanatical backers seem to think, I want Star Citizen to be a good game. But until the day it manages to get there from where I'm sitting, I'm going to keep pointing out where CIG could do better and where I think the game is falling short. If any game can't stand on its own merits and needs a frothing at the mouth fan base to hunt down every critical opinion of even the most mundane aspects of that game, there's a problem. And Star Citizen has that in spades. So, with all of that, I think this properly sums up how I see Star Citizen 3.5. There's hope that CIG will build off of the ideas implemented here and this build going forward, but the track record is not exactly great, and the timeline is in years. So, if you're an outsider looking in, I strongly urge you to do all the homeworks when it comes to buying Star Citizen. And I would also very, very strongly recommend not buying into Star Citizen until trying it during one of the sadly rare free fly weekends to see if this game is really for you. If you're already tied into this game and you haven't been playing for a few months to a year or more, this patch will absolutely be worth checking out if they can get the servers to be stable. If you're a Spectrum warrior from the Spectrum, you keep doing you. Y'all are doing a way better job at turning away potential backers than I could ever do, even if I was trying. So, with that said, my name is FailureToReport. You stay safe out there, citizens, and I will see you out there.